Welcome to our show, Our World Today. Tonight, I'm just thrilled about our show, Latin American Update. And as lots of you know, I have a home in Brazil. I have just passion about South America, Latin America, best place on earth. And so I wanted to do a show on this, and I finally found the right person to do the show.
Thank you.
Thank you. John Peterson, thank you so much for coming on.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Really. So we were talking before the show. We may even continue this and do more updates.
Sure.
If in the future. You are a correspondent on Latin America and all the Americas for an organization or a website called Marxist.com.
Yep, the In Defense of Marxism website at Marxist.com.
Okay. And you're the National Secretary for Venezuela, Hands Off Venezuela.
Correct, yep.
Which is an organization...
It's an international campaign based in about 40 different countries, which organizes solidarity with the Venezuelan revolution, countering the lies of the media, building ties between trade unionists and other working class people and young people in Venezuela and around the world, and basically raising awareness about what's really going on in Venezuela and the rest of Latin America.
Great.
So
that's totally needed. And then you're also editor for a magazine called The Socialist Appeal, which you
have
a copy of right there.
I have a copy of right here, Socialist Appeal. It's the magazine I'm on the editorial board of.
Yeah.
And we cover a lot of topics, mostly United States, labor movement, the economy, the elections, of course, politics.
Yeah.
But Latin America is a really big, important topic that we cover a lot as well.
Now, tell me a little bit, what got you hooked on Latin America and being so interested in it and learning so much about it?
Well, I was born in Mexico.
Oh, there you go.
So it helps,
Yeah, that helps.
to grow up speaking Spanish. And
okay.
I've lived in the United States for about 25 years, but go back and forth, and have seen a lot of the contradictions growing up between, the wealth here and poverty there, and then
yes.
poverty here and wealth there. I mean, the contradictions are in both countries.
Right.
So growing up, seeing how Mexico and the rest of Latin America were affected by the foreign policy, by the imperialist policy of the United States government, its economic policy, its social policies, and so on, really got me interested from a very young age in being interested in what was going on in Latin America. And a few years later, about 10 years ago now, when I started reading about Marxism, started reading Karl Marx and Lenin and Trotsky and all that stuff, and realized that there was actually a framework for explaining why this exploitation takes place, why there's so much inequality between countries and, of course, between the classes, why there's the vast majority of society are so poor and a tiny handful of people have so much wealth concentrated in their hands. I really started to realize that not only could I understand better what was going on in the world, but that you can actually do something to change it. And that's why I got involved in socialist politics.
Yes.
Eventually, with a group of other people around the United States and around the world, really, co-thinkers from Marxist.com, we organized the Workers' International League, started publishing Socialist Appeal, started the Hands Off Venezuela campaign, published books about socialism, Marxism, Latin America, and really starting to get an echo now that the economic crisis has hit the United States. A lot more people are open to learning about what we're talking about. It doesn't seem so far off now or so theoretical or abstract. It really reflects what's happening in their lives. And of course, I've also worked with a lot of immigrant workers in this country and the immigrant rights movement. And the connections between Latin America and the United States are closer than ever, which we can maybe talk about a little bit later. The effects that the Latin American Revolution, which is what we're talking about, are having and will have in the United States.
Right. And so you realize, though, that socialism and communism and Marxism are really demonic words and considered un-American.
A lot of people think that, but you'd be surprised. Now, with this latest economic collapse, we were actually, some of our folks were down on Wall Street selling this paper. We were handing out leaflets that said capitalism has failed. And people on Wall Street were like, "Yeah, ain't that the truth?" I mean, people's consciousness can change very quickly, as we've seen in Latin America over the last few years, where 20, 30 years ago you didn't have such huge organized movements for social change, for real fundamental change in these countries, as we now have in country after country after country. Because what is a revolution, after all? A revolution is when the masses of society, who normally don't have any role to play, or they don't think they have a role to play in everyday politics, in making decisions,
like 80% of the
in
people
changing their lives. Exactly. They're poor. They're just trying to make ends meet. They're maybe illiterate. They think that the professional politicians are the ones that take care of business. When they enter the stage of history, the millions of factory workers, of peasants, of housewives, of youth, of urban poor people that enter the stage of history and start to take their own destinies into their own hands and start to try and change their societies, change their system ultimately, that's what a revolution is. And that's a process. It's not a one-day event. It's not something that happens overnight. There are, of course, important points of inflection during that revolutionary process which mark a sort of transition from one phase to another. For example, in 2002, in Venezuela, in April 2002, as you know, there was a coup organized against Hugo Chavez. And the masses of Venezuela rose up and brought him back to power. They overthrew the coup.
They overthrew the coup.
like in the movie The Revolution Will Not Be Televised. That was an important turning point.
Movie to see.
Incredible. It documents that turning point in the revolutionary process. But that process has continued and is now taking place in country after country. And that's the real danger from the point of view of the American ruling class. That's the danger of the Venezuelan Revolution, and of revolution anywhere, really, is that example, the example of average, ordinary people thinking that they can take their natural resources and put them to use for their own interests. Use their oil, their trees, their water to provide schools, healthcare, education. The realization that you don't need to have just two political parties that go back and forth, two corporate parties that trade power time after time after time, that you can actually build a different party, that you can re-energize parties, workers' parties that already exist, and ultimately take political power and start that process of fundamental transformation, which isn't finished yet. It's far from finished. There's still a lot of contradictions, still a lot of work to do, but the fact that it's rolling is what scares ultimately the corporate interests and the ruling class, the capitalists in this country. And that's why they have to squash it, and that's why they've tried time and again to squash these revolutions. And recently in the news we've had some pretty important examples of that.